So I am definitely a huge Joss Whedon fan. His work, not so much him as a person. This video is going to be focusing just on the Nevers as it stands alone, and not really going into the personal life and the issues that's been going on over there. I might do a video on my thoughts on that, but if you're looking for that energy type of video, there's a bunch of other places you can go to check it out. We are just going to be looking at the first episode of The Nevers, how it compares to the rest of Joss's work, and just how Whedony is it. So let's just dive into it. The show takes place in London, August 3rd, 1896. No shock there if you've been following the show's development for as long as I have. The opening sequence of the show is pretty much just a master crafter flexing his craft. It is a complete 5-minute long sequence with absolutely no dialogue, set to a gorgeous score that just absolutely sucked me in right away. It gives you these little snippets of each of these characters' lives that you're about to meet and kind of tells you a little bit about them, showing it to you rather than telling you, and that is just the epitome of good writing, if you ask me. Within 3 minutes, I already cheered as soon as I saw Adele in the wheelchair, and the people I was watching with thought I was crazy. So the sequence kind of comes to a close with all the characters that we just met looking up at something in the sky. We obviously know this is important because we got the date before. And then we cut to this really interesting shot here where it's the character of True, and she's walking down this alleyway. She turns. It looks like she's deciding something, goes to leave, and then turns and walks this way and just dives off the side of this concrete thing into a pool. Now, this sequence might be something that's kind of overlooked, I guess, by the casual viewer, but it's something that I really, really appreciated. It showed us, once again, it showed us and didn't tell us that this was a decision that she was making, that it looks like she made it on a whim. Maybe it was something she was thinking about. It looks like she wasn't very happy, and really intrigued me. In the first 5 minutes, I was intrigued by every single person that I saw. So we jump to 3 years later, and there is still no dialogue. And this scene, if you are familiar with a lot of Joss's work, kind of really reminded me of the opening of the Buffy musical, where it's the orchestra and we see everybody going about their days within the house. This sequence is kind of like the evolution of that sequence. We see True getting ready after she's sleeping on the floor. We see Penance, and she's building things. We know that she's building things. We kind of see them getting ready for their day until we are finally treated with the first line of dialogue we hear, which is more important than you think, and I will come back to it by the end because it all comes full circle. We get them doing this.
Mrs. True?
Miss Adair?
You look very fine.
I think so too.
Now, truly, at first, I was like, oh, that's a little choreographed and seems a little staged and seems a little Whedony, but by the time you get to the end, it's just a perfect example of excellent writing skills, if you ask me. The way that this sequence sort of evolves by the time you get to the end of just the first episode. It's good shit. Boom, once again, shown, not told, runs an orphanage, got it. Then we get a really nice sequence where we follow the two women we just met through the streets of London in their horse and carriage. Super awesome. You get to see London. It looks really pretty. It kind of reminds me of the way that the opening of Sweeney Todd is done, and you get to see the little boy with the newspaper saying "Milady kills," so it's setting it all up real good. So then we follow Penance and True, and they go to visit somebody's house to go, as far as we know, up until this point, pick up a girl that they are bringing back to the orphanage. This scene is like really, really well done. You really should watch this scene to get the full clip of it, but it starts with Penance and True talking about other jobs that they've been on. They go inside of the house. They have a conversation with the parents of the girl that they are going to bring back to the orphanage. It's done really, really well. The woman that plays the man's wife is really funny. She's got a lot of really snappy dialogue. Penance and True are kind of making jokes about the last time that they had to go on a job and how it turned out. It's just really, really good. It brings us into the world really concretely. It shows us what they do, what their purpose is, why they're here. It's wonderful. We also get the first look as viewers into what True's power is. Specifically, if you didn't know, the show is about women with superpowers, women and some men with superpowers. Well, now you do. I actually love the way that this effect is done. She kind of does this twitchy thing with her fingers that I think works really, really well, and it reminds me of an anxiety attack. And based on Joss's other work, I can assure you that there are probably metaphors for the people's powers that will have to do with like actual struggles that humans experience in everyday life. You know, metaphors.
Why is she chained?
Then we see what the application process is for this orphanage. Penance and True go upstairs and they see the daughter of these two people, and she is chained to a bed. True is very upset about this. Penance and her kind of comfort her and tell her what's going on, and we find out that this girl is speaking in a whole bunch of different languages. The parents think that she is possessed by the devil, and we also find out real quickly that True can speak most of these languages.
Chinese!
Most of it. Some of it may have been Russian, and I want to say Turkish.
Men break into the house to steal the girl that Penance and True are after, and so Penance and True both go upstairs, and True releases her full-on power, and we see that she kind of has superhuman strength. It doesn't seem like Buffy or Slayer status, but definitely she is a little bit more gifted than other people. She's also probably just a trained fighter in general. I'm sure that we will learn more about this. The fighting style is a little bit like Buffy, but a little bit toned back. There's not kind of a lot of like wire tricks or anything that can't really happen in reality. It looks like this is what would happen if this woman could actually fight, is what I mean. Then it just like sends me there, and I realize I am watching a new Joss Whedon show. We get these people with weird faces coming to steal the little girl that they're after, and we get this awesome moment that made me clap. And it turns into frickin' brass knuckles, and she punches the guy out. It's great. We get a really fun chase scene in the carriage, and we get really important lines that are very, very simple, but I think show off why Joss is such a good writer. The first one is this.
I'm going to have to change it out.
You mean it's only a prototype?
Might seem really simple, but is a really, really good detail. It shows that Penance is always creating things, that she creates things that are prototypes, that she's a little bit hesitant when it comes to the safety of these things. With the scene previously, we saw that she's a little bit more submissive when it comes to dealing with people that she feels uncomfortable around, and so far that seems specifically men in general, so I'm interested to see where that goes, but this was just a really, really good line that told you what you needed to know in the scene. One that does that, but even better, is this line in the same scene.
This is weird for us too.
And like, seriously, this had me jumping for joy. Like, we, the viewers, are on this adventure with these two characters we just met. We have no idea if this is like normally how things go, and just in this little funny line that I think will just like kind of go over people's head as being funny and cute, told you way more than you needed to know. Well, actually, it told you exactly what you needed to know. That this is out of the ordinary for them. They don't normally deal with this, and that it's kind of a little bit weird. Like, let your characters enjoy the sensationalism. Okay, and so I knew that this show was going to be, you know, Victorian and kind of that Penny Dreadful vibe, a little bit of Buffy and X-Men and the Umbrella Academy, but what I didn't realize until this moment was that it was gonna be fucking steampunk, okay? Like, we have the robot that's driving the carriage, and then we get this motorized car, which, you know, us watching it in today's lens are like, okay, it's a motorized car, what's the big deal? It's kind of cool. But then I realized later when all the characters are, like, looking at Penance's car, and they're like, whoa, this is so cool, is that, like, it's a motorized car, they don't have those. Duh! Then, as they are driving away, True gets another vision, and it turns out that they go into the opera.
It's just a woman.
So I read like a few lukewarm reviews for this show, and you know, they were saying that the men, which are obviously the evil patriarchal men, are kind of like caricatures of evil people. Now, I totally get that because that's exactly what's happening here. You know, they sit around a table, they talk about the devianced and the touched, and the scene ultimately tells us that, you know, the people in power and the people in government know about the affliction that these people have. They're not living in secret, which is the main point that I take away from the scene. But also, you know, they talk about how they are very, you know, dangerous to society, and they're the deviants, and they're the women, and we got to take care of them, and they want rights, they want to be in society, and all that stuff. So So the metaphor is very, very heavy. But what works for me in regards to these villains is you have a lot going on in this first episode, and he's balancing a lot. This is not just a group of supernatural women that are fighting against men that are evil. This is a group of supernatural women that are fighting, society and these men. But we just saw in the scene previously that there is a whole nother subgroup of whatever, robot people with weird leather faces that are also kind of against these women. And then later on in the show, you'll find out that there are other groups of touched that are against these women as well. So I think that this actually really balances out kind of the same issue that the first episode of Game of Thrones went into, where there was so much going on that by the time you got to the reveal of Cersei and Jaime sleeping with each other, it didn't feel as heavy as it needed to, because you were still trying to figure out who these people were in relation to the world and their conflicts with each other. So then we're brought into another subplot, which appears to be this man. I actually don't remember this character's name, because I actually found this to be the least interesting scene to me. I think that the reason that it was interesting was because the dialogue was so quick that it was kind of hard for me to keep up. But there's this murder scene that happened in what seems like a mine, or just like an underground place that people are working at, which is probably a mine. And this man is going around investigating these murders. That ties into the little boy with the newspaper that we saw earlier. That is this woman named Malady that is going around. We can assume at this point that she is also touched. She's going around killing people. So he is investigating, and it turns out that the crime scene was faked by these people because they're protecting their own. So if this is insinuating that they're like somehow in cahoots with Malady, I don't really know, but this scene didn't really tickle my balls, if you know what I mean. So we finally get back to my girls at the orphanage, and this is when they all surround Penance and her car, and they're like, that's so cool. And we're also introduced to a bunch of other of the touched. I read some theories online that people think that it's people that are oppressed in society, which is the reason that it is mostly women. And there's a theory that it affects gay men as well, but we don't really know how accurate that is yet. I love the way a lot of the touched interact with each other. I specifically love, probably what a lot of people are going to say from the episode, but the large girl with the girl that doesn't speak any language, or a bunch of different languages that aren't English. And this just has so much potential to have like a really good storyline, a really good friendship. It's really funny. It's kind of used in the same way that Potential Slayer is, that didn't speak any English and couldn't understand anybody. So that's really fun. And I just actually really enjoyed this. It also kind of reminded me of Dawn being big in the Buffy Season 8 comics, so I think that might have been where Joss maybe got his inspiration from, or something he always wanted to do. Later, we're introduced to the character of Swan, and he is 150% the Xander Topher wash of this series. He is definitely Joss speaking through the writing and the episode itself. This character, I think, was something he probably wanted to do for a really, really long time. If anybody remembers, in the episode of Angel, the third to last episode where they go to Italy to follow Buffy around, Angel and Spike do, Joss was very adamant about the fact that Andrew in that episode was always supposed to be bi or gay, and he ended up walking out of the room in one scene with two women to go out for the night. And Joss, in a few interviews, did say that he was upset that Andrew did not leave with a man and a woman, since he was not on set that day. He was doing stuff for Firefly. So I think that it's really interesting that he managed to get a main character that is definitely bisexual, that we see from the beginning. And apparently his MO seems to be like he wants to open up a sex club for the people that are touched, but I'm sure there will be more development on that later. I'm also pretty sure this is the only time that we see any nudity in the show, which instantly reminded me that I'm watching Joss Whedon on HBO, but there's not that much nudity or too much sex in this show. It was actually it was a little tamer than I was expecting, but this joke is so funny with the back of Swan having the skeleton makeup that the man he was laying next to had on the front of his body, so he definitely bi.
Sorry I kept you waiting. Did I keep you waiting? I'm at odds with time.
Topher. See what I mean? True goes to see the Giles of the show, who is also a healer, and this scene has another very interesting piece of dialogue that does tell you something that I think is a really good example for writers. All True says during this scene is, "I like watching you work," which is very, very simple. It shows us that these two people have a very good relationship, that True is constantly being hurt, and that this character, Horatio, I believe his name is working on her a lot, and they have a good relationship because of it. Once again, this is an example of a mastercraft writer knowing how to write a scene.
Miss True,
Miss Adair.
you look very fine.
I think so too.
This is the second time that we hear this mantra as the two of them are getting ready to go to the opera. And by this point, the second time I heard it, I was like, oh, this is a thing that they do. This is like a call and response. This is like a Dama and Starbuck, bring home the cat. I get it. That's why it feels that way in the beginning. So then we get this scene with the two women going to see the Beggar King, and we learn that that is the reason that they have the information about the girls that they need to go look for, the girls that are touched. They're nervous that the King of Beggars, the Beggar King, yes, I think The Witcher 3 when I hear that too, is responsible for the reason that there was other men at the pickup spot. He doesn't give them any information, but this scene does really ham home and show us once again how these two characters interact in a situation like this. Penance is kind of nervous, held back, whereas True is very, very stoic, aggressive, doesn't back down, stands her ground, knows where she stands, and it also shows the balance between the two, how they kind of hold each other in place, how they work together, and why it's important that both of them are there for each other. Penance keeps True kind of level-headed when it comes to falling into one of her flash forwards. Ripplings, I think, is what she refers to it as, which I also kind of fucking love. So yeah, this scene is just kind of establishing those things. The most interesting head-scratching moment of the entire episode for me was this one right here. When the Beggar King finally says, "I'm not going to help you two ladies out, get out of my face," he holds a knife to True's face, and she says,
This isn't my face.
and that just got my panties just tickling. I mean, we know that True was pretty much committing suicide at the time that she got touched. So I think that maybe something went wrong with hers, or possibly she is responsible for the touched in general, and she is like a higher being, or maybe an alien. These sorts of theories, I don't know, I'm still thinking about, but it really got my brain tickling. Then we get to the opera. We get another example of the anxiety moment right here in regards to True and her powers and how it's used. We also get some more Adele, which we did not get enough Adele from Dollhouse in this episode, but I'm sure that will be made up considering that she's like the Mrs. X-Men of this series, I guess. She's in the box with Penance and True, and before we get there, we have a whole conversation with the evil patriarchal man that we saw earlier that was also in the beginning. He gets into an argument with the women about employee versus employed. I don't know if this is actually true in regards to history, but they're talking about how employee and employed, employee is like a new word that's being made up for the employed, and they imply that employed states that it's a collective group, whereas employee is an individual within that group and gives them power and gives them humanity in regards to that word.
I killed the devil.
And in the middle of the opera, actually in a sequence that's done really, really well, where True is having another one of her anxiety moments, and then the pyrotechnics on the stage go off, and the man that's playing the devil rises from the stage and comes up, and he's got a slit throat, and you're kind of like, is that the way the show's supposed to go? Even as the viewer watching this show, I'm sure the viewers in the actual show that we are watching see the show and this moment as weird in and of itself, but you slowly figure out that this man was actually killed, and we get our first taste of malady. Now, Joss is obviously very obsessed with opera. He's very obsessed with theater.
Men with your groping and spitting all groin, no brain, 3 billion of you passing around the same worn out urge. Men with your sales.
And we know this from his other work, where I just see this as like the culmination of all of that. It reminded me a little bit of the David Lynch Mulholland Drive theater moment with Yorando. It was just really good. It was really theatrical, and I am so impressed with the bitch that played Malady, because she gave me life in this monologue. I know that it's probably not for everyone, and it might be really over the top, but like, I am here for the theater of it. I am here for the really, really awesome entrance he gave this character, and I cannot find out more about her powers since we don't really know how they work.
Oh, he sings. I could never make it out, but I feel his arm like a comb in my throat.
Malady and her band of other touched, one being a man with a machine gun arm, basically, just starts decimating everybody in the theater. And in the middle of this, one of the opera singers starts singing. Now, this scene I actually really loved. Now, it's really interesting because this scene like should not have affected me as much as it did as a viewer. Like, I found this really heartwarming. It was like a really good way to kind of stop the action, and there was this moment where I realized the importance of this character without anything else having to have been said or have been done. She has the ability to sing and connect with every single person who is touched, and I absolutely just, I love that concept. There's something about it that just like kind of got me, and I really liked it. You know, and it kind of made me think of Lorne in a way.
La?
Another awesome moment right there. But, you know, True puts up a good fight. Unfortunately, Malady gets away because they are a little bit OP with their firebender on their team. But, you know, whatever. They end up taking Malady, and her crew ends up taking the singing girl away. They probably also want to use her for certain things to maybe create a band of misfit touched, or maybe they're the ones that are actually correct. Who knows? This show could go in so many different ways. So, unfortunately, the singing girl that they want gets away, but this leads us into the arc of season 1, or the first couple episodes, I guess. Then we get the only moment with Dennis O'Hare, and I sat there and I waited for him the entire time. He's one of my favorite actors, and he's doing experiments on the weird guys with the masks and drilling into their heads. We have no context or any idea what's going on here, but that's what he's up to. We cut to what seems to be some time later, and Penance is looking for True and ends up finding her. She got into a bar brawl. She seems very drunk, and we get the third repetition of the mantra.
Mrs. True?
Miss Adair.
You look very fine.
Got into a fight.
One, the way that she delivers that line of "I got into a fight" is just gorgeous. This is the first time that I actually think this mantra between the two of them, sort of how Penance has been keeping True on this plane and not letting her fall into her ripplings or her anxiety, that this is actually used as sort of like a way to call and response her back to reality and keep her there with her, and to just keep True in control. The episode ends with beautiful music and a beautiful moment with Penance and True sitting with each other outside of the fight after True is finally calmed down, and they talk about how they're going to find her, how the song, find the girl that was singing, how the song that she sang touched their hearts, and they could feel everyone in the room, and they knew that they weren't alone. We are then treated again to the scene that we saw in the beginning, you know, that skipped to 3 years later, where everybody was looking up at the sky, and we see that there was actually a large flying UFO, you could call it, that came through over London and dropped these, like, sparkly seeds onto people and touched everyone that we know is touched. We also find out that some people didn't have a very good reaction to the touched. It seems like the man, the patriarchal evil man that doesn't like the word employee, it looks like his daughter, you know, was touched by this thing and got the light on her and ended up dying. So we might go more into why he thinks that the touched are so dangerous and need to be stopped. Now, after watching this twice and seeing Melody's monologue, she mentions that she feels like she saw God. As you can see here, this is a shot of her eye. She really thinks that like they were all touched by angels and that she was given this gift and that everybody turned their backs on the people that were touched by this godlike being as she sees it. And she says in the middle of her monologue something about them all wearing hats. You were all wearing hats. Now, there's another theory that I saw on the internet that a lot of people think, not a lot of people, but certain people think that the reason it affected mostly women was because men wore a lot of hats back then, and men were actually wearing their hats in that scene, and it needed apparently skin-to-skin contact in order to become touched, because a lot of the main characters, yes, it does land on their clothing, but usually it lands on a piece of their skin as well, and if you're wearing a hat, it would kind of avoid that from happening. So that would explain why. Another theory that I saw is like sticking with the fact that all the touch that we've seen so far are either POCs, men that we can probably assume might be gay or just queer in general, and women is that this being came through to kind of help the oppressed, and that their powers have a lot to do with their status in society. I think that that is something that could very well work. I don't know. I think it's a little too early to find out. And that brings us to the end of the episode. So now I am just going to talk a little bit about my personal thoughts on where I want the show to go. So after this episode was over, I just kind of sat in silence for 2 hours, and besides the fact that my boyfriend wasn't really prepared for me to have a reaction like that, he didn't know how important Joss was to me, and with the drama surrounding this whole show and him leaving the show, it did kind of upset me. I felt like this was the last Joss project that I was going to get, and I do think that if people are saying those things about him, that it needs to be looked into, and I hope that's not the reason that he decided to leave the show. I do think that it probably falls down to more to him being stressed and overworked and COVID happening and all these things, because everything we've heard from this cast seems to be that things here were pretty professional. Laura Donnelly, the lead, actually stated that in the first meeting she had with Joss, he kind of laid out the entire arc of the show, and she said it was really in depth and really layered and just like super, super intriguing and interesting, and she was so excited to work on the show for years. Now, we do have a new showrunner. Her name is Patricia something. Sorry, I'm kind of going off the whim here, so I'm just thinking about it. Well, we have a new showrunner. Now, I hope that this showrunner does follow Joss's intended arc, because there's a lot in this episode that I could see somebody just kind of looking at it, not realizing the layers that it could have, sort of just kind of infusing things that I don't think would necessarily work. I think that somebody might automatically go kind of the Xena Gabrielle route and make Penance and True romantically interested in each other, where I'm totally fine with that. I think that it would be a lot more interesting to explore a platonic friendship that really has the weight of a serious relationship where you actually really need each other and you really support each other and love each other, just not sexually. So I hope that that's something that happens. I really don't want it to lean too much into the metaphors. Joss is usually pretty good at balancing this metaphor, caricature kind of thing happening, and I really don't want the show to go that route. It really does sadden me that every time there is a Joss project, it feels like something gets in the way. Besides Buffy, Angel was canceled. We all know what happened with Firefly. Dollhouse is kind of like the sequel to Firefly in that regard. And we know what happened with the Avengers, obviously with Justice League. So I took this as kind of like Joss showing off everything that he's good at. An ensemble cast, a band of misfits getting together, really strong, likable characters that he can manage to do without any sort of dialogue. Maybe I was alone in being really intrigued by the characters with the first time I saw them, but I was really intrigued with it, and I thought it was really good. I actually haven't really spoken to anybody in my life about how I felt about the show because it hit me oddly emotionally, but I do hope that they at least follow his outline. I don't necessarily need Joss to be involved with the show. I would really like it, but like I said, I'm just a really big fan of his work. I put him in the same level as, Stanley Kubrick. We all know he was an asshole during The Shining, and Alfred Hitchcock. We all know he was an asshole to a lot of his actresses too. Not saying either is okay, but we can still talk about their movies like it's a good movie. And this is a good script. I've looked at some of the Rotten Tomatoes reviews. I don't agree with all of them. A lot of them complained about the caricatures of the evil people, and I know the evil men specifically, and I know that I went into my thoughts earlier in the video on that, but I think it really, really works and is simple. And it's kind of like things are cliche for a reason because they work. Just because something is cliche doesn't make it bad. It's more of the way that it's handled. And because of all the factors that were in this script and all the things that was trying to be balanced and introduce and start, I think that having the villains be a very simple caricature that we can understand makes it very easy to understand why we should not like them, and then slowly develop and show their backstories. There's a rule that I did actually learn from Joss Whedon, and it was kind of what he did with Mrs. Calendar. When you introduce a character, he said it is more interesting to hold on to their backstory, even if you don't know what it is as a person. Don't just as a writer, don't just, make up a backstory for this character, because then you're kind of stuck with it. If you don't go into their backstory and don't reveal it even to the characters on screen, even if you might know, you have the ability to kind of change it and develop it and make it more interesting, which is kind of what happens with Miss Calendar being a gypsy in Buffy. It wasn't something he was planning, it just worked, and it turns out to feel like something that was actually planned. So I hope that is something that happens with these men and the villains, but if they do manage to just be like paper-thin characters, that's cool too. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my thoughts on some other films. I think I'm going to be sticking with this style of video, so if you want to see more from me and my thoughts, I will probably be talking more about the Nevers, considering next week is a Jane Espenson episode, and I have lots of thoughts on her as a writer. And once again, I just wanted to say thank you. My name is Tyler Austin, and you're listening to my thoughts on the Nevers, Episode 1. I will be back next week with Episode 2.